Hi everyone! Today we're going to be going over some more young Earth creationism. Why? Because a couple of days ago I opened up YouTube and I got recommended this video claiming to have definitive proof that humans and dinosaurs lived alongside each other. Now, as a geologist and lifetime paleontology fanatic, I know that there is decades worth of geochronological evidence and paleontological evidence from the fossil record that humans and dinosaurs did not live alongside each other. So I immediately thought, sus. But you know, let's give this video a review and see how well its claims stack up to reality. First up, when you click on the video, you'll immediately notice that the channel's name is Genesis Baptist Church. If anyone doesn't know, that is the channel of Kent Hovind. Who's Kent Hovind? Well, according to his website, where he uses this utterly bizarre piece of AI art to advertise himself, he is a former maths and science teacher who has spent 50+ years as a Baptist minister, specifically a very, very infamous young Earth creationist minister. Why is Kent Hovind so particularly famous, or infamous, and well known? Well, because in 2001, he opened up a young Earth creationism theme park called Dinosaur Adventureland, which was described as the place where dinosaurs and the Bible meet. Now, this place has a bunch of exhibits which display dinosaurs and humans living together and contains a mixture of other pseudo-scientific content. And it, according to Pensapedia, closed in 2006. But according to this article in AL.com, it reopened in 2018, and as far as I'm aware, it's still open now. Speaking of that article on AL.com, in it, Kent Hovind told the journalist Anna Vollers that evolution, you know, evolution, that thing that every single concept in the field of biology is based on, was the dumbest religion in the history of the world, despite the fact that we have decades upon decades upon decades of fossil evidence for it, of evidence for it in the morphology of living animals, and genetic evidence for it, which can't be said about any religion. He also explained dinosaurs in a very unusual way. He said, in his exact words, which I have on the screen here, "It's very simple. Before the flood came, in the days of Noah, the Bible tells us that people lived to be 900 years old. Genesis chapter 5 tells us that. Well, I taught biology, and reptiles never stop growing. So, what would happen if a reptile could live to be 900? That's the dinosaurs. No big mystery." Now, Kent has also had more than his fair share of legal troubles over the years. To quote Pensapedia, Hovind failed to obtain proper permits during the construction of Dinosaur Adventureland and was convicted of tax fraud for deliberately circumventing the law regarding the reporting of revenue and payment of employees. So that's a little bit of background on who Kent Hovind is. Now onto his video, and considering that we have a very comprehensive fossil record, he's going to need to present some very, very strong evidence to back up his claims. Does he? Let's find out.
In 1535, the Spanish conquistadors came through that area and they found stones with strange animals on them. They sent some back to the King of Spain and said, "What on earth are these animals carved on these rocks?" The king said, "I have no clue." Today they're called the Ika Burial Stones from Ika, Peru. These stones show dinosaurs on them. The Nazca Burial Stones. From about the time of Christ, plus or minus a few hundred years.
Okay, so I just want to point out that his source for that first claim is from a website called weirdvideos.com. It's not from a journal or a book by a respected author. It's from a website called Weird Videos. And the reason it's not from a journal or a book, you know, we'll get to in a bit. First up, I want to point out that every single word he said about 1535 and the King of Spain was, as far as I can tell, a lie. Specifically every reference to 1535. I have been able to find references, though pretty much entirely references in Young Earth Creationist articles, many of them citing him for carved stones being taken to Spain in 1835 from Peru. But this video is the only evidence I've seen of the King of Spain being involved. Also, these stones would not have been the ones with dinosaurs on them, which were first reported by a guy we're going to talk about in a little bit in the 1960s.
Some of them show brain surgery. They find brain surgery instrument, hardened copper, tempered copper instruments for cutting into people's heads, apparently. Some of them show heart surgery, limb reattachment, steam engine. One of them showed what looks like a steam engine. Strange things are found on these Ika stones in Peru, but quite a few of them, over 500 I believe, show dinosaurs. Here's one from our museum. Shows a dinosaur holding a guy by the head. This one we've got shows what appears to be a guy cutting the head off the dragon because the dragon killed his friend. You can see the friend's body is inside, but his head's missing. This guy's jabbing one through the throat with a spear. This one's hard to see, but he's shoving the spear down the dragon's throat.
Okay, so now I need to explain what the problem with the Ika stones is. Where do I begin? We know that these are fakes. How do we know this? Well, because the guy who first brought them to the attention of the scientific community admitted to faking them. But we'll talk about that later. First, let's just have a look at the designs on these stones and review them in terms of why they're very implausible to have been made by someone who was looking at live dinosaurs at the time they were alive. First up, let's just bring up the elephant in the room. All of these dinosaurs look like the way we imagine dinosaurs to look in the early to mid 20th century. The theropods have an upright, erect, kangaroo-like posture. The sauropods and ornithischians have a sprawling, lizard-like gait. And we now know that both of these postures would have broken the spines and or legs of the animals involved. These are not something that the real animals would have been able to do. Why do these animals look the way we thought they looked in the 1960s? In particular, let's look at this artwork of a diplodocid on an Ika stone, which clearly shows a sprawling posture and looks a heck of a lot like this artwork by Roger Payne. So I think there was probably some references used here of contemporary material. Let's go on to the next one. That's right everyone, we're halfway through the episode, which means it's time for our game of Rockman. What's Rockman, I hear you ask? This is Rockman. Rockman is the sentient weapon which I shall use to take over the world. These letters are a geological phrase which doubles as the summoning spell for Rockman. Every week, you have a chance to guess a letter, and if you get it wrong, a rock goes on Rockman. But if you get it right, your letter goes on the board, and you are one step closer to guessing the phrase. Last week, with a grand total of 5 upvotes, the highest voted letter for Rockman was R. Is R on the board? Drum roll, please. No, R is not on the board, which means my victory draws ever closer and a new rock is placed on the body of Rockman. Do you have what it takes to stop me from taking over the world? Write your guesses for the next letter in the comments below, and the most upvoted letter will get picked and put on the board, or a rock will go on Rockman and the planet will be mine. Anyway, back to the rest of the video. If we have a look at this particular Ika stone, we can see that not only are once again the theropods portrayed in this kangaroo-like stance, which would break their tails, but the Stegosaurus has a humpback and a tail which is lying on the ground. We now know, thanks to more remains of Stegosaurus and its relatives, that this pose was anatomically impossible for Stegosaurus. If this was designed by someone who saw a Stegosaurus and then drew what they saw on these stones, why on earth did they draw the Stegosaurus to look like an early 20th century depiction of what we thought Stegosauruses looked like? It's also worth noting that if you zoom in on some of these theropods, they appear to have sails on their back, implying that they are what was then thought to be what Spinosaurus looked like. As I'm sure you're all aware, more recent discoveries have shown that Spinosaurus was completely different from this or any other theropod. If these are, which I think it's pretty clear from the sail they are, Spinosaurus, why do they look like that? We then have to talk about the fact that the Ika stones regularly portray sauropods as vicious predators which are attacking and killing humans. This is despite the fact that sauropods have no adaptations towards predation at all. In particular, they have peg-like teeth for stripping leaves from trees, not anything that you would imagine would be effective for tearing flesh from bone. It's also worth noting that in addition to all of these dinosaurs being reconstructed as they were thought to be in the 1960s and earlier, none of these dinosaurs appear to belong to any species that have been discovered since the 1960s. Curious, isn't it? Why might that be? It's almost like the people carving them only knew about dinosaurs that had been discovered yet. The fact that there's no dinosaurs from South America as well puts a serious doubt on their validity. But now we need to talk about the actual really big problem with these stones. You see, the Ika stones were first discovered by this man, Basilo Ustruya, who claimed to find them in a cave and never gave the location of that cave, and first reported them to this doctor, who was a medical doctor named Javier Cabrera Darquea. I hope I pronounced that right. Now, Ustruya and Darquea both heavily capitalized on these discoveries, opening a museum and selling their finds. But in 1997, according to this article from the Fortean Times, television archaeologist and documentary filmmaker Neil Steed visited Ustruya to ask about these stones, and Ustruya told him, point blank, that he and Cabrera faked thousands of these stones. Like, he just flat up admitted they weren't real. Now, interestingly, he did recant this, and then unrecanted this several times, but I think it's very clear that they were a grift by these two men to trick tourists and make a living through a con. So the reason that this section might be angled a bit differently is that after I filmed this video, I had a look at Trey the Explainer's video on the Ika stones to see if I missed anything. I highly recommend his video. It contains a lot more detail that I missed, but something that's really worth pointing out with the Ika stones that he found that I was not able to find anywhere is that there are photographs of Ustruya holding his reference materials that look just like the carvings on the Ika stones. It's almost like they were blatantly fake. So yeah, Kent Hovind is completely ignoring the fact that these were obvious fakes, which were admitted to be fakes by one of the two people who first discovered them, and only represent a very outdated view of what we thought dinosaurs looked like, which means that they literally can't have been made by people who were living alongside dinosaurs at the time. They are not real. And I'm sorry, but I struggle to believe that Kent Hovind doesn't know this when the information has been out there and easily available for decades.
Some of them show circles on the side. Now that's kind of interesting. Why would they put circles on the side of the dinosaurs? Well, nobody ever found dinosaur skin until about 20 years ago, when fossilized dinosaur skin was found. It's very interesting. The dinosaur skin has circle patterns on it. They had to see a live one to know to put that on the stones, because you couldn't tell that from the bones.
We now need to address Kent Hovind's claims about circle patterns having been found on Triceratops. There are quite a few skin impressions from Triceratops, and these appear to have much larger feature scales, but these feature scales are much smaller proportionally than is drawn on the Ika stones, and they are present all over the torso, not just around the leg. So once again, it's pretty clear that Kent Hovind is completely misrepresenting the facts to mislead his audience.
Recently, they just found unfossilized soft dinosaur tissue. Soft dinosaur tissue? So now the brilliant scientists are trying to figure out, how could tissue stay soft for 70 million years?
Okay, so Kent Hovind just actually gave us a really interesting case study here. Now, soft tissue preservation is extremely rare, and usually when it comes to fossils, what we usually refer to when we say soft tissue preservation is actually the mineral replacement of soft tissues. For example, have a look at this worm, which I found in Oligocene sediments off the coast of the Falkland Islands. This worm's soft material has been replaced by silica. There's no actual original soft material there, but all of the textures of the skin and the inside of the animal's gut are still preserved. That's actually not what happened in the case study he's talking about. This is actual soft material from a Tyrannosaurus rex tibia, which was described in, I believe, 2005. Editing me will confirm that. And was texturally still very much the same stretchy, sort of a bit hadit material that it would have been not that long after the animal died. So, how is this the case? Well, in 2014, a biochemical study by Dr. Mary Schweizer and colleagues, who examined this soft tissue and compared it with other soft tissue preserved from the hadrosaur Brachylophosaurus, as well as material from a modern-day ostrich, with the decay of which they studied both under immersion in blood and under immersion in water, revealed an answer to why it was that this material was able to stay preserved. Basically, they found that in the fossilized soft tissue, all of the tissue was surrounded by tiny iron nanoparticles, which originated in the hemoglobin of the dinosaur's blood cells. Schweizer et al. Found that soft tissue that is coated in blood that isn't washed away by rain or by fluid flow is preserved for much longer. In their experimental study, their blood vessels from an ostrich remained intact after 2 full years after remaining in blood, whereas when they just remained in water and the blood was washed away, the blood vessels rotted after only 3 days. How is that the case? Well, it all relates to the biochemistry of hemoglobin. Basically, when the hemoglobin is not washed away, it both absorbs the oxygen in the body and just around the body, creating a fantastic hypoxic environment for preservation. And it also produces free radicals, which are, in this case, oxygen atoms that have free electrons that have been released from the hemoglobin molecule. And because they have these free electrons, they really, really want to react with other chemicals. Now, when these molecules are released, they react with the proteins in the soft tissue and bind them together into really, really huge, tough, sort of mega molecule chains. This makes them extremely rot resistant. So, if this T-Rex was buried quickly, there was no rain going over it, the fluid flow going through it is very little, and it remains in an anoxic environment, it's actually not that implausible that soft tissue would remain after millions upon millions of years. In fact, we know that happens because we have the 2 case studies that were talked about in this study, one of which you're showing on your screen.
The thought will never cross their brain to question that maybe it's not 70 million years old. I mean, that thought will never enter their head, okay?
So, why do scientists think that this hypothesis for why we have soft tissue in the T-Rex specimen is much, much more likely than what you propose as the dinosaur only being a few thousand years old? Well, you see, the soft tissue comes from specimen MOR 1125, popularly known as B-Rex. Now, this specimen was recovered from the Hell Creek Formation, and a lot of work has been done on the Hell Creek Formation to determine its age. I highly recommend reading this absolutely fabulous review paper by Dr. Denver Fowler, which studies the stratigraphy of this formation. This paper tells us basically every study that has looked into its age. We know that it contains the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary at the top of this formation, which is where the dinosaurs went extinct, which so many radiometric studies have all dated consistently to around 66 million years ago. It also has magnetostratigraphic horizons, that being the remnant magnetism in cores from changes in position of the Earth's magnetic poles, which are very, very similar to what we see in rocks of around that time elsewhere in the world. We also have direct absolute ages from those rocks, determined from argon-argon dating of ash layers in those rocks, as discussed in the countless references in Denver Fowler's study. So if you want to know why it is that we know that these rocks are 66 to 68 million years old, look at the references in that study and read them, and if you don't agree with them, that's on you. You can have your reasons, but they have a huge amount of evidence, and all of the scientists who worked on those studies independently came to the same conclusions about the age of the Hell Creek Formation, and thus the age of that T-Rex. It is not a few thousand years old, okay? So when you consider that scientists never considered a younger age, scientists always have to consider a younger or an older age when dating rocks. But you have to acknowledge, it sure is interesting how they all came to the exact very narrow set of dates as a conclusion independently of one another. It's because that's how old the rocks are.
This guy's cutting the head off a dragon. There's a guy riding one. We got a ton of information on dinosaurs living with man. Sometimes they're in friendly gestures, like this one's petting him. He's got his head laying on his shoulder, okay? Pottery was found with dinosaurs on it. A mummy was found in a tomb wrapped in a blanket, and all around the blanket were dinosaurs.
Okay, so we've already debunked the stuff regarding the Ika stones, but this bit is really, really interesting. So first, Kent claims that this mummy was surrounded by textiles which all have dinosaurs on them. But those textiles that we can see in the picture are all white, and we can't see any textiles in that photo except the ones draped around the mummy, which don't have dinosaurs on it. But I have been able to find photos of ancient Peruvian rugs and ancient Peruvian textiles, which do appear to have what look like dinosaurs on them. Now, it's worth noting that these only come from younger creationist websites. I've not been able to find any archaeological sites that verify that these are actually ancient Peruvian rugs. But in any case, let's just critically evaluate what we see on these rugs. Because you might initially look at it and think, oh, that's clearly a sauropod. But it does also have a very, very large head. And it's worth noting that ancient Peruvian textiles have a tendency to very, very, very strongly stylize the animals that they show. For example, if we look at the rugs in this article on the Penn Museum website, we can see that this one looks a lot like a picture of a chameleon. But chameleons don't have big pointy ears or live in South America. This was actually how they drew pumas. And this was not the only way that these artists drew pumas. These guys stylized animals like crazy. Take a look at the myriad of different ways that they drew fish. And the ways they drew birds were wild. These things don't look like and shouldn't be interpreted as any specific species or really any animal with confidence. So how on earth can you look at things produced by a culture which stylizes animals this drastically and then look at these artworks in this textile and say, yes, that is definitely 100% a dinosaur? To me, I think that these are much more likely to be llamas because of that long head and the bitey mouth.
Why would they put dinosaurs on their blankets? Why would they put them on their pottery? Why would they carve them on cliff walls? Why would they put them on their waistbands?
Oh, I can answer that. You're lying!
In Acámbaro, Mexico, 56,000 ceramic figurines of dinosaurs were found.
Okay, 56 figures from Acámbaro, Mexico. And these things sure are weird looking. And it's certainly interesting how they all have that same sprawling posture that modern lizards have, rather than any kind of posture that we know dinosaurs could have had, but the same posture that dinosaurs were always drawn as having in early to mid 20th century artwork. So again, these figures make much more sense as something that was created by somebody in the early to mid 20th century who had an idea of what we thought dinosaurs looked like then, and then obviously they created these figures, and what we know of dinosaurs now doesn't match up with what they thought dinosaurs looked like then, which is why their figures look nothing like real dinosaurs, so they can't have been made by people who lived alongside dinosaurs. To make things even worse for Kent Hovind, in 2017, scientists used thermoluminescent dating to work out when the clay that these figures were made of was fired, i.e. when these figures were made. And these figures were first reported to science in the 1940s. The thermoluminescent dating indicates that they were last fired in the 1940s. These things were made and then immediately given to a museum, and they told the people at the museum, hey look, we found some ancient artifacts! I've attached a link to the paper describing this in the description below. Now, while that article does have a paywall, you can just easily sneakily access it through Sci-Hub, so it's nothing to worry about.
They knew about them in central Mexico. They have always lived with man. They did not live millions of years ago. But everybody today is saying dinosaurs lived millions of years ago. Nobody's ever seen one. Yeah, I think they have, okay?
I hate to disappoint you all, but it's not true.
And that's the end of the video. It's certainly interesting to see someone lie so many times whilst claiming that they are the ones being truthful about what the evidence says as regards to science and as regard to paleontology. I think at this point I have completely obliterated his arguments. If you still believe what Kent Hovind is saying, please just look at the sources in the description, because it's all nonsense. Kent Hovind is lying to you. And that's basically it. I don't feel like I have any grand conclusions to say, other than the fact that, you know, young Earth creationism is wrong, and demonstrably so. If you want more videos debunking pseudoscience from me, I'm happy to do so. I'm probably not going to keep doing more presented ones like this because trying to remember my script was a massive hassle. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Huge thanks to my patrons, Jean and Eric Feenstra. I really appreciate your support, it means a whole lot. Huge thanks also and shout out to Planarwalk, whose idea and suggestion it was originally that I respond to Kent Hovind. She suggested this the same day that she suggested I respond to Mud Fossil University. So yeah, but by sheer coincidence, Kent Hovind came up in my recommendations, and I'm not one to look a gift horse in the mouth. If you are Kent Hovind, please be honest with your viewers, with your followers. Like, even if you're not convinced by evidence for old Earth creationism, please don't use long debunked arguments and long debunked hoaxes. This is willful disinformation at this point. It's lying. And I want to believe as a minister of faith that you are much better than that. So I'm gonna leave off saying, if in the unlikely event that you watch this, Kent Hovind, just look into the resources and be honest. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye!